Everybody. In this week's brief video lecture, I wanted to walk everyone through problem theory, program theory, and logic models. So to begin, what a problem theory really is an identification of the risk and protective factors for a specific social problem. So I developed this kind of mini problem theory here that is looking at the relationships among various risk and protective factors for substance use cravings and the actual behavioral component of substance use. So here, if you follow my pointer, this is basically similar to the theory of planned behavior, the public health model, where you have various cognitions or behaviors, various cognitions which lead to intention, which leads to a behavior. So here I primarily have three risk factors, depression, anxiety, and trauma, that lead to an intention to use or a craving. And then here for awareness, I have a protective factor that buffers against experiencing substance use when a craving occurs. Okay, so in this model, a craving is definitely a risk factor for substance use. Depression, anxiety, and trauma are all risk factors for substance use. But then a protective factor that we have here is awareness. And really, what this model is saying is that substance use is predicted by these various things, these various risk protective factors, and they all have somewhat different relationships with substance use. So generally, all programs, program theories, and the logic model, which is basically just a visual representation of a program, really begin with some kind of theoretical model that explains the social problem that the program is treating. Okay, so this is a fairly common model for substance use. These are pretty well-known risk and protective factors. So let's say that we agreed that this was a good problem theory for why particular persons use substances. And if we agreed that awareness was a critical protective factor, then what we might do is develop a program that really focus a lot on mindfulness. Maybe we had different components of mindfulness, maybe some meditation activities, some physical yoga activities or moving meditation, and perhaps some kind of evidence-based intervention around mindfulness, making people more aware to really buffer those effects of the craving on substance use. So we might develop a program where we deliver this intervention either to individuals or in groups. But really that program or that intervention would be based on this theoretical problem model. We're identifying awareness as a key protective factor. So we might also include other components, mental health, maybe an integrated treatment. So the underlying depression, anxiety, or trauma are also being treated concurrently with our mindfulness interventions. But again, really, a problem theory, really all you're doing is developing a causal theoretical model where the primary outcome is going to be at the end of this causal chain here. And then really you're going to think about, okay, what predicts the experience of this social problem? And when you think about these predictors, it's good to have both risk factors that we'd like to reduce and then protective factors that we would like to bolster. Because majority of successful programs, they treat a variety of both risk and protective factors for the social problem. Okay, so this is the problem theory. This is a problem theory. And you are definitely feel free to play around in your various areas of interest and try and develop your own theoretical model. And ideally, too, when I was developing this, I know this field fairly well, but I went to Google Scholar and I also looked up some meta-analyses for substance use and craving, particularly in adolescents. And these are what some of the meta-analyses were reporting as some of the key risk protective factors. Okay, so this is a basic problem theory. I'm definitely happy to answer any questions folks have about developing your own problem theories. And you'll get an opportunity to do that in your first paper where you're developing that problem statement. Okay, so we also are going to talk a little bit about program theory and the program logic model, because in a lot of ways you'll see this in the Fraser reading for this week. Logic models are definitely a pretty critical component of program theory. And basically what the program theory is it's an explanation of exactly why the program works. Okay, and it also provides some pretty useful information around how the program works. Okay, so a lot of you are probably familiar with developing logic models, but what I thought I would do is just go through each of the major components and give a brief description of them. So this is the template that everyone has access to. And here, the first thing that goes into a logic model are the inputs. Okay, and these are the materials or resources needed to operate the program. Okay, so things like budget or funding is needed to operate a program. Generally, you need staff and personnel. You need a client base, right? And this could also potentially include a referral base. What else would you need? Depending on where you are, you might need office space. You might need rooms for, in our example, yoga / meditation groups. And it can even go into things like office supplies. So these are anywhere from desks, computers, software, to chairs and tables for the conference room or the break room or for the rooms where individuals are doing groups. So basically in the inputs, you're going to list all the raw material and also immaterial resources that you would need to operate the program. Okay, so the inputs are generally straightforward. If you have any questions about those or anything else with this, again, just feel free to post them on the discussion Q&A or to send me an email. Okay, now basically the activities is what is the program doing with these resources? Okay, so in our example, we would be running meditational groups, right? And we would also be hosting yoga sessions. And we might also be doing individual therapy. And you might want to put in here the specific modalities that you are using. Okay, dialectical behavioral therapy possibly for substance use, EMDR for trauma, DBT I believe is also effective for treating some of the softer mental health issues like depression, anxiety. So for the activities, basically, what are you doing with these resources, right? And in most cases with human service agencies, these are involving the actual services that are offered. It could include some outreach activity depending on what you're doing. But basically the activities are what are the main services that are offered or being delivered, right? So in our example, I put things like intake and assessment. If you really want to get detailed, you could put what type of evidence-based assessments you use to assess for substance use or mental health disorders or whatever area you're focusing in. So it is kind of difficult when developing a logic model to think about the level of detail you want to provide. So basically, you could probably get rid of these bullet points in here if you wanted to save a little bit more room and you could just separate various components with a single space line like that. And I'd say your average size logic model in Times New Roman 12-point font fills up about a page, right? So it should be about a pretty full page right here. If you're thinking about how big or small should your logic model be, or what level of detail should you provide. Okay, so just to recap, the inputs, those are everything you need to run the program. The activities are what are you using these inputs for? What are the main services that are offered? And the outputs are the tangible products or deliverables that you expect to result from these activities. Okay, so in our case, we might want to put something like, in the first 3 months of running the program, 90 clients will complete 12 weeks of meditation and yoga intervention. It could be something fairly concrete like that. And really what outputs are a quantification of your activities. How are you quantifying them? How are you measuring them? So a lot of times this includes things like we just put like number served. It could be the number of interventions that are given. It's a little different than outcomes, because outcomes are really looking at the effect of your activities on the clients, whereas outputs are really just quantifying what it is that you're doing. Okay, so a lot of times outputs can be a little confusing, but what I would recommend is think of them in terms of like total number of persons served, your program utilization. If it's an inpatient treatment, you have 28 beds, you want to have 100% utilization, so you're using the funds appropriately. It could be things like that, or the number of treatments delivered, or the number of trainings delivered. But the important thing is just setting a time parameter around that. So here we put like in the first 3 months, 90 clients will complete 12 weeks. So yeah, that's basically it for outputs, is how are you quantifying your activities? And then come the outcomes. So in logic models, outcomes are divided between short, medium, and long-term outcomes. And short-term are generally, you can think about them as the most immediate effects of the intervention. So we might first experience an increase in self-awareness as a result of the yoga, meditation, and various evidence-based interventions that we're using. Okay, so that's kind of an immediate effect of doing yoga, meditation, and maybe even something like an enhanced sense of well-being. And don't think too much about how you're going to measure this stuff, because that's what the later components of the course are going to get into. Okay, and then the medium-term outcomes, whereas short-term kind of starts with more cognitive aspects like changes in thoughts or attitudes, medium terms start to get a little bit more behavioral. Okay, and basically what you want to ask yourself for each one of these is, okay, as a result of participating in yoga and increasing self-awareness, how will this self-awareness impact the individual? Okay, so there might be something like, I'm trying to think of how to best articulate this, but possibly less cravings. Another way that we could potentially think about this is more or increased episodes where craving does not result in substance use. Okay, there might be different ways to quantify this. But really, we're expecting an increase in self-awareness, enhanced sense of well-being, to begin to impact the actual behaviors here, possibly through experiencing less cravings, possibly through that awareness really buffering the effect that craving has on substance use. Okay, but there might be a couple other ones that we could think of there. But then in the final one, you really want to think about what are the ultimate goals of the program. And what we hope from this program would be a significant reduction in substance use and a significant increase in it might be something like a sense of well-being or welfare. And this here might also be something like prolonged or sustained. Okay, so depending on what program you're doing and what your area of interests are, your short, medium, and long-term outcomes are going to look quite a bit different. But really what you want to do is think about, okay, what are your ultimate goals? And if you want to start with the long-term goals, if you want to, reduce substance use, this is called backwards design that we'll be learning a little bit about this week too. You can start with the long-term goals and then work yourself backwards. Like if we wanted to start with a significant reduction in substance use, well, how would we achieve that? In our problem theory model, we identified that awareness was a potent mechanism that helped reduce the effect that cravings have on substance use. So if we want to reduce substance use, we want to increase awareness, okay? And we also want to decrease cravings. So you can kind of work backwards from that if you want. That's called backwards design. But that's pretty much it for the logic model. I just want to provide a brief video where you could actually hear me walking through the various components of the logic model. So I look forward to answering any questions you guys have.